Oh, continuing to learn about Baal Tosif. It's important to learn about these sugyas, not because every single time we come to a sugya in Paragul of Hagazol, and we've learned together, most of us for years now, we don't keep dropping anchor every 10 minutes to spend 3, 4, 5 weeks on a sugya. But this sugya is particularly, and these sugyot that we've been dealing with are real shas sugyas. And they also give us, I hope, some window into a better appreciation of how Chazal want us to understand the halachic system. Tonight will be, I hope, an example of that, following in line with what we've seen until now. Let's begin. I don't want to spend a 30-minute review and a 45-minute to an hour share, but let me just put on the screen and scroll through some of the things that we've seen so far. So we looked already at the Rambam in Hilchot Mamrim in Perek Bet. We talked about the idea of what Baal Tosif and Baal Tigra are, and they have to do with adding something to the Torah or removing or lessening something that's in the Torah. But in the Rambam's iteration here, it refers to, in this case, not the performance of mitzvot, but refers to the idea of the misinterpretation of what is actually a mitzvah min haTorah versus what is a mitzvah midirabanan. The case that he gives, the example down below here is chicken is forbidden, but not forbidden min haTorah. It's forbidden midivrei Chazal. It's an extension that really chicken and milk is mutter min haTorah, which doesn't give you a license to do it, just to understand the gradations. And he explains as he goes various different ways. If we were left to your own devices, you could very easily reinterpret lo tevashel gediba chalevi mo, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, to suit your taste. You pardon the pun. You could figure out all sorts of gymnastics about how it means one kind of animal, or only in its own mother's milk, or right, or of its own species, and all of these different things that we had seen. And that was the Rambam's basic idea. When the Sefer HaChinuch picked it up, the Sefer HaChinuch lists this in Parshat Re'eh. I didn't put on the screen this time, I probably should have. We also saw at the outset last week, the Psukim. There are two sources for Baal Tosif and Baal Tigra. One is in Parshat Va'et Hanan. The second is in Parshat Re'eh. Both of them have the same formulation. One is the singular, one is the plural. So the plural formulation is in Parshat Va'et Hanan. This one is in Parshat Re'eh, refers to the one that comes across in singular. Lo tosef alav, lo tigra mimenu. We saw that Rashi, the Ramban, we saw their opinions and their approaches, each of them to the pasuk, which is drawn right out of Chazal, to Rashi and to the Ramban. Particularly, let me stick with Rashi first. It had much to do with objects of mitzvah. Don't make 5 compartments for the tefillin shel rosh. Don't take 5 species in one case for the lulav etrog hadasim arav. Don't add a 5th species. Different things like that. Baal Tigra, don't decide you're only going to have 3 parshot instead of 4. Don't decide that in tzitzit there's going to be less instead of more. Right. So all of that we already discussed. When the Sefer HaChinuch picked it up, he talked about adding to the mitzvah of the Torah, and he sounded like he was very much in line with the Rambam. He quotes the Rambam. But then we saw that after he quoted the Rambam, he went a little bit off in his own direction, only because it wasn't exactly the way of the Rambam. And I mentioned, by the by, the Sefer HaChinuch very often hews closely to the Shita of the Rambam. Here he did not. He quotes that most of the Mefarshim saw that Baal Tosif only applies to a mitzvah aseh, that it has to do with objects of mitzvah, about how to put on tefillin, and what's going to happen with the lulav, right? If you took 2 lulavim ksherim in your hand, a person who sits in the sukkah after Yom Tiv, after Sukkot is over, on purpose, in order to perform the mitzvah of sukkah, even though you know that the mitzvah of sukkah has ended, that it really is not going to be Baal Tosif unless you have a kavana to do the mitzvah itself. And I'm reviewing this on purpose. We're going to see other opinions tonight. You have to have it sort of in your active memory. Can't just be a vestige from last week. So also a person who takes a lulav after the holiday, and you say, I am now performing the mitzvah. Not that you picked it up, but you said, I have kavana, I'm going to perform the mitzvah. We're going to see Gemara tonight in Rosh Hashanah that's going to speak to this issue. And you know that the holiday has ended. And so it is in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah. We're going to see that Gemara tonight. We'll look at it inside, where it explains there about Rava's opinion. I skipped it here because you're going to see it in the Gemara itself. From the roots of the mitzvah, because the one who commanded us, the master commanded us regarding the Torah, may he be blessed, in the fullness of in the ultimate completion, ultimate wholeness. All of his actions, all of his commands are shleimim v'tovim. They're complete. They're good. And anyone who adds to it, so basically, that would be an absence. That would be something that would be detracting, and also one who detracts. It's obvious that it would be this way as well. He quotes various sources. We won't see all of them tonight, but at least we'll see the one in Rosh Hashanah a bit later. So it's applicable everywhere. It gives the examples, all related, it seems, to objects of mitzvah, right? And something about the kavana of it, right? So you'd be over on this lav, and you'd have to get malkot. You need edim, hatra, etc. Bal tigra is just the opposite, and that's basically what he says here. It's a little bit more complicated, but not too much more complicated. He basically quotes the same kind of idea, although he's also quoting the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, which I won't show you here. We're going to see it in the Gemara itself. Okay. Then we looked at this Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. And in this Gemara, I see I'm already 10 minutes in. I better speed it up. Rabbi Yitzchak pointed out we blow the shofar many, many times, many more times than we need to, it seems. So why do we keep blowing the shofar when we're seated, when we're standing, all different ways? We have 100 blasts our time. The Gemara is not referring to that. The Gemara here is referring to 30 blasts before the Amidah and 30 blasts during the Amidah. That's what most Rishonim, other than the Balamor, believe it to be. So we answered Kedela Arbev HaSatan, to mix up the Satan, some kind of metaphysical or mystical idea, whatever it is, it's not our concern. We learned this Tosfot together. And we talked about the idea of, wait a minute, shouldn't it be, the Bali Tosfot asked, shouldn't it be Bal Tosif, right? And if you're going to argue that actually the person was already Yotze, so it's not at its optimal time because the mitzvah is already finished. If you're going to say Kevin Tikvar Yotza Havale Shelo Bismano Dulo Avar Amrinan Besof Perak Ra'u Beitin Gavi Birkat Kohanim Mosif Bracha Achat Mishalo. We're going to learn that this is the Gemara we're going to see inside, that adding an extra line to Birkat Kohanim is not going to be permissible because the time for the mitzvah is not ended. Why? Because if you are a Kohen and you pass by another shul and they beckon you in, could you give us a bracha? You could give them a bracha, and that means it still hasn't ended as a mitzvah for you for that day, as opposed to, let's say, and that's the question, about shofar. You can't say, well, it was Yotze the mitzvah, so this is just extra. It's not part of the mitzvah. No, it must be part of the mitzvah, since later on, you could, if more people need you to blow shofar for them, you would still be motzi them. The answer of Tosfot, which we're going to see the counterpoint to today, is they maintain that Bal Tosif does not have to do with repeatedly doing a mitzvah. It's not with doing things repeatedly. A Kohen who goes to several congregations, or someone who takes the lulav and then in the afternoon picks up the lulav again, or someone who blows shofar a bunch of times during the day, right? The Matnot Bechor, I'm skipping, okay? That's not, but the point is, it's not Bal Tosif. It's not Bal Tosif. Bal Tosif is actually where there's something going on that is there's something going on that is actually impelling a person to feel that they have fulfilled the mitzvah, and therefore they can't do it again. That would be Bal Tosif. Bal Tosif would say that's not Bal Tosif. Okay. Again, this is all review from last week. I'm just getting to the mainstay for tonight. Okay. So, and we're gonna talk about this issue in the Bali Tosfot's approach in contradistinction to their approach of the Rashba, who we'll see momentarily. But first, among the last of the Bali Tosfot is none other than the Rosh. And the Rosh and his Tosfot, the Tosfot HaRosh, is generally built off of the words of the Tosfot that we have on our page. But here, the Rosh, as I pointed out to you, added some words. So whereas the Bali Tosfot talked about doing the same mitzvah, here he's quoting this from them, right? Take the same lulav again. Blow the shofar a few times during the day. Matnot Bechor, we'll come to it. That's going to be the Gemara there. But it adds here, it's only going to be Bal Tosif if you add to the object of mitzvah. You're going to add a string to the tzitzit. You're going to add a parsha to the tefillin, right? or you have two pairs of tefillin and you want to add and say the real mitzvah is to use two full pairs. That would be a problem. That would be Baal Tosif. So to the Baalei Tosfot and the Rosh, again, coming at the end of the era of the Baalei Tosfot, not disagreeing with Tosfot on our page, just filling it out. Because Baalei Tosfot on the page that we saw in Rosh Hashanah, page 16b, indicate that Baal Tosif is not the repeat of the mitzvah again and again and again. It's something else. Rosh fills in its objects, just like Rashi said on Chumash. And therefore, if you want to keep blowing the shofar because you want to mix up the force of the you want to somehow cause some puzzlement to the proverbial prosecutor against the Jewish people, mutav, no problem. You're not doing anything that's considered bad.
So what you're really talking about is inherently changing the structure of the mitzvah,
of the object of the mitzvah,
of the object of the mitzvah.
Okay, but what we will see is not everyone's going to agree with that, and we're going to see some of the sort of primary sources and say that really makes sense. Is it only the object? Well, here's an example. I'm going to show you now. So this is where we got to last time. Now, next part comes the Rashba, and I'm glad I found a better edition of the Rashba. The original one was in so to speak Rashi script that was printed in the end of the 19th century. Very hard to read till you figure it out, but this is much, much easier. So here, the Rashba goes after the Baalei Tosfot and actually questions the Baalei Tosfot's approach and will come up with another idea of what exactly why it is okay to blow the shofar so many times. It's not going to be Baal Tosif, but it's not because the repeat of the same mitzvah is necessarily going to be enough to say, well, that's not Baal Tosif. And we're going to see the example in depth shortly. Before we see this Rashba, what I didn't give you in the source packet last time, which I added to this source packet, I'm going to not make everybody dizzy, but I'm going to skip now a bunch of pages, is I put on the back page here the Gemara that everyone's referring to. And this is going to be important in order to understand what is transpiring in the Rashba. How did the Rashba marshal an argument against the Baalei Tosfot? And it all turns on understanding this Gemara, which is one of the, not the only, but one of the headquarters Gemaras to understand the notion of Baal Tosif. So we're not going to learn a page of Sukka tonight, but we will learn at least an Amud, or almost an Amud, in the world of Masachet Rosh Hashanah. And let's see how far we get, how much we need. So, as you know, Gemara is always in the middle of a conversation. We're not going to learn from a Mishnah because it would take us pages and pages to get here. The discussion is, do mitzvot require kavana? And if you just do a mitzvah and you're not paying attention whatsoever, you don't even realize you're doing a mitzvah. Can you fulfill the mitzvah anyway? Or do you have to have some kind of mental focus, not to know all the reasons for the mitzvah, not to know the ins and outs of the halachas? It just, you understand that you're doing a mitzvah now. That's it. Do you need it or not? So the Gemara was discussing a case.
Do you need what? I'm confused.
A kavana. Do you need your brain plugged in that you have enough focus that you realize you are now performing a mitzvah? I'll give you the examples right in front of us, right here.
You have to be in the right frame of mind.
Yeah, like the example that you're going to find right here. Look at here's what it means, right? So let's see. And again, we're picking up sort of in the middle of a conversation. So the Gemara had said previously, Rava says a person who's playing music on a bugle, only it's instead of a bugle, it's a shofar, and it happens to be the holiday of Rosh Hashanah. So Rava maintains that that a person is actually, and they do this, they're still going to be yotzei because you're making the sound of the shofar. You fulfilled it. The Gemara says, well, that's pretty obvious, right? So the idea here is that perhaps you need to actually have in mind, as the one blowing the shofar, I am performing a mitzvah now. I'm not just blowing a bugle, not just to hear the sound, but to have it in mind. Rava seems to maintain, and that's the second line of the Gemara here, Alma kasava Rava, mitzvot ein tzrichot kavana. They don't need kavana. Ein tzrichot kavana, they don't need it. So here's the example. Eitvei. Here's the challenge against Rava's approach. Haya kore b'Torah, v'yagia zman hamikra. You're reading in the Torah, and it came time to read. What are you reading? Zoom up with me, Rashi.
Shema.
Kriyat Shema. Right, time for Shema. So you happen to be up to Parshat Va'etchanan. It's the week of Parshat Va'etchanan. You're sitting in the morning and you're learning. You're going through. So Haya Kore B'Torah V'Igia Zman HaMikra Im Kivein Libo Yatsa. If you had in mind they're going to be Yotzei, then you're Yotzei the mitzvah. V'Im Lav. If not, Lo Yatsa. You're just not Yotzei. So my love Kivein Libo Latzeit. Right? What do you mean you have to be mechavein your heart? In what way? Don't you think it means that you have to have in mind, I want to be yotzei the mitzvah? No, says the Gemara, no. Likrot. You have to have in mind that you want to read now. It's not to do with the mitzvah. You're sitting doing your Shnai Mikra, you got to the parsha of Shema Yisrael, and you're reading Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, in the Sefer Torah, in the Chumash, and you have in mind, I want to read now. I'm learning Torah. Then someone tells you, taps on the shoulder, you made Zman Kriyat Shema. Great, I did the mitzvah. That's it. The Gemara says, what kind of kavan is that? Likrot? Hakakari. You're obviously reading. It says you're in the middle of reading. It was the beginning of this case right up here. Hayakore Bator, you're reading. So you have to have kavana to read. So the Gemara answers, Bikori lahagia. When a sofer wants to review the comparative scrolls, the one that he's copying from and the one he's copying to, he goes like this. Sound familiar? He's not really reading. He's scanning his eye, and he is, as Rashi puts it, migam game. He's not really reading. That's up here. Av kari ein kan el migam game. Okay, you with me? That's Rashi. So the Gemara now says the following, right? In other words, this challenge to Rava was basically saying to Rava, hey, you think you don't need kavana to be yotzei the mitzvah? How about needing kavana to be yotzei the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema when you're reading? No. You just have to have kavana. Rava basically answered. It was answered for him. You just have in mind that you want to read something. It so happens you're reading Shema. Okay, now you're yotzei the mitzvah. You don't need actual kavana. I am performing the mitzvah of Shema. You don't have to do that, according to Rava. So now comes the next case. Tashma. Haya over achore beit hakneset. You're passing by the back of a shul. O shahaya beito samuch lebeit hakneset. V'shama kol shofar. O kol megillah. Now you have a Dvar Torah for your Purim Suda, right? You happen to hear the sound of the shofar, or you heard the sound of the Megillah being read. Im kivein libo yatsa. V'im lav lo yatsa. If you didn't have it in mind, you won't be yotzei the mitzvah. You won't be yotzei the mitzvah because you heard it, right? So the Gemara here said there's another piece of evidence with regard to Rava's point. My love, im kivein lo bo latzeit. Well, doesn't kivein libo here, the words here again, doesn't it hinge on having kavana that you want to be yotzei the mitzvah, right? So the Gemara says lo, right? Lishmoa, right? You have to have kavana to hear it. Ask the Gemara, lishmoa, to hear it, v'hashama. You are listening to it. You're in the middle of listening to it. What do you mean? You have to have kavana to hear it. Savur chamor ba'almahu. You might be of the opinion you're hearing the braying of a donkey. Now, it doesn't work for Megillah, but a shofar, if it's a low sound, and halachically, the sound of the shofar can be a very low, you pass by and you hear, I hear a sound. But if you don't realize that's the sound of the shofar, you can't make it out, and you think you're hearing the sound of a donkey braying, you're not going to be yotzei. So you have to have kavanim kivein libo that you're hearing. You don't have to have in mind, I am being yotzei the mitzvah, shem yichud, kud, shabrichu, shchinte. It's not about that. It's just that you have kavana, that you're hearing it. So now another challenge marshaled against Rava. Okay? Eitvei, that we know that Chazal teach us with regard to the hearing of the shofar, nitkavein shemeh v'lo nitkavein mashmiya, if the listener had in mind, but the one who was causing the sound to happen did not have kavana to be motzi others, or the mashmiya of v'lo nitkavein shomea, or the mashmiya had in mind, but the shomea didn't have in mind, if either the sender or the receiver of the sound of the shofar did not have in mind, lo yatsa, ad sheyitkaven shomea umashmiya, till they both hear the sound and have kavana. They have to have kavana. Those words, ad sheyitkaven, have to have kavana, both the shomea and the mashmiya. Okay, so says the Gemara, bishlama nitkavein mashmiya v'lo nitkavein shomea kasavar chumur ba'almahu. I understand if you want to tell me that the guy who was blowing the shofar had in mind to be motzi others, it was the listener. He had the problem because he thought he was hearing a donkey. El nitkavein shomea v'lo nitkavein mashmiya hechi mishkachat la. How could it be that the person who was blowing the shofar didn't have in mind to be motzi anyone, but the guy listening thought, oh, I'm yotzi the mitzvah? La b'tekei shofar. All right. Isn't that the case if a guy is blowing the shofar? Lashir, tekei lashir. He's playing the music. That's the sound that he likes to make. He's playing a bugle. He doesn't have it in mind otherwise. The Gemara says, Dilma menavach nevuche. Maybe the guy thinks that he's actually hearing the sound of, he's making a sound rather of barking, i.e., when he's blowing the shofar, it's coming out in a very, almost like you could say a guttural sound, right? And while he's he's blowing air. You all heard this. People don't know how to blow the shofar, or they sputter, so it comes out like as a sputtering sound. But in the midst of it, the proper sound came out. Don't ask me how. It's a Gemara, so it happened. Yeah. So in the middle of doing that, where the mashmiya, the one blowing the shofar, he was not intending to blow the sound of the shofar. It just kind of came out. Like it barked out. So if that happened, it went from the low guttural sound, and then the sound came out. Oh, can he be motzi someone else? Okay. So now, all of these cases were about the speech and whether the speech had the right kavana plugged in. And Rava has so far deflected attacks on his idea that mitzvot ain't srichot kavana. In case you were sleeping, this was all the preamble to the next line, okay? Which goes like this. Abaye now attacks Rava, and this attack is where we get to Baal Tosif. But I needed this run-up to show you how we got there. Amar le Abaye, el me'ata. Let me give you a case, Rava, where your concept, mitzvot ain't srichot kavana, doesn't add up. Hayashin b'shmini b'sukkah yilke. A person who sleeps in the sukkah on the 8th day of Sukkot, it's not the 8th day. It's Shmini Atzeret. Now, they're not talking about Chutz La'aretz. They're talking here about an Eretz Yisrael. You're allowed to be in the sukkah. You're commanded to be in the sukkah for 7 days, but on the 8th day, you cannot be in the sukkah. You're not allowed. What do we do in Chutz La'aretz? We hedge. We say it's a suffix. So we don't make a bracha. Meitav Yatvinan, it's a Mem Zayin. Meitav Yatvinan, Bruchilom Avarchina. We're going to get there in a couple of years, right? We don't make the bracha on Shmini Atzeret. And we're hedging. If today is really the 8th day, so then we have a Kavanah Shlo Latzeit. If today is really the 7th day, so then we're being Yotzei to be at least inside the sukkah. So but Abai says to him, Ayashin b'shmini b'sukkah yilke. Amar lo.
Well, we don't hedge with sleeping, right? We only hedge with eating. Nobody sleeps in.
Right, except that if someone were to sleep in the sukkah, there's also a question there. Like, okay, so you slept in the sukkah. We don't do it, but that's not clear that would be Baal Tosif. They're talking here in Eretz Yisrael where you're not allowed to be in it, and you'll get malchut for being in it. So Rava said back to him, Amar lo, she'ani omer mitzvot eino over alein ela bizmanan. You can only be over on mitzvot in their own time, but not after their time. Now, what did he mean, mitzvot? You cannot be over upon them except during their time. Rashi here explains these words, and this is the crucial section. Hayashim b'shmini b'sukkah, shelo l'shum mitzvah. Let's say you went in the shmini in the 8th day in the sukkah, and it wasn't for the sake of a mitzvah. Yilke, you should get lashes. Why? Shahari mosif al mitzvah ve'over mishum bal tosif. That's what Abaye said to Rava, right? What did Rava say back? No. The mitzvah, you cannot be over a mitzvah unless it's during its time. That's over here. Yeah? Only during its time. What did that mean? Back to Rashi. Bibal Tosif, you cannot be over on a mitzvah with Bal Tosif of adding to the mitzvah, Ela Bizmanan, except during the time when you're obligated in that mitzvah. Kigon, Chameshit Hamin in Belulav, Vehei Totafot Betfilin, Chamesh Tzitziot Betalit. Any of those would be Baal Tosif. Aval, however, Tosefet Yom al Yamim, O Sha'a al Sha'a, Ein Ze Mosif. If you're going to add a day to the days or time to the time, since there was an expiration time on the mitzvah, you cannot really be over on Baal Tosif. Rava says to Abaya, only agree that there's something called Baal Tosif in a mitzvah as long as the mitzvah is still in force. But once the mitzvah itself has been exhausted and its time has expired, then you can't be over anymore. So based on this, if someone decided, I don't know, to take 5 species for the lulav in the month of Kislev, it's not the time for the mitzvah. So it's not Baal Tosif. It just doesn't apply. Now, if you started announcing, I'm going to be Mekayim the mitzvah of lulav right now in Kislev, that would be Baal Tosif, because now you're obligated. You made yourself, you're claiming the mitzvah is extant where it's not extant. Rashi is saying here is a mitzvah, according to Rava, a mitzvah has a shelf life. And when it ends, it ends. And you can't any longer claim that it's in the air. So the Gemara doesn't end there, though, because it says, here's a case of a question, Mativ Rav Shimon bar Abba. And here's a question by Rav Shimon bar Abba, basically on what Rava just said. And that is, Minayin lekohen she'ola, one second, Larry. Minayin lekohen she'ola duchan, shelo yomar hoil v'nitna li Torah reshut levarach et Yisrael, osif bracha achat mishali. Since the Kohen can reason, I was given license by the Torah to bless the Yisraelim, the Levim and the Yisraelim, so I'm going to add my own bracha, kigon, such as, from the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, Parak Aleph, Hashem Elokei Avotechem Yosef Aleichem Kachem Elok Pe'amim, etc., etc. Talmud Lomar, therefore we learn in Parashat Va'et Hanan, Lo Tosifo Adavar, do not add. Okay, so now, says Rav Abba bar Shimon, or Shimon bar Abba rather, Veha hacha kaven debarichle avrle zmaneh. But I thought after you already fulfilled your mitzvah, because you gave the bracha, so now it's over. Now I fulfilled it. Why can't I add a line afterward? Vikatane de'avar, yet it does say that you're over on Baal Tosif if you add a bracha to the 3. The Gemara clarifies, no, this is what we're really talking about in this case of the Kohen. It's b'delo sien. It's where you're in the middle of giving the bracha. Yeah, you're in the middle. You said varech echa, and you stopped, and you decide you want to now add in your own thing. The Gemara says, really? Well, that Breita, if you keep reading, actually says v'hatanya siem. It actually says the word siem in it. It means you finished. So the Gemara says, no, it meant siem bracha achat. You said yivarecha Hashem v'yismerecha. Then you want to add Hashem Elokei Avotechem in the middle. The Gemara says v'hatanya siem kol birchotav. No, the Breita says siem. All the brachot, Yivarechecha, Ya'er, and Yisa, you finished the lines. So how then the mitzvah is expired? Why is Rav Shimon bar Abba still claiming that adding other brachas after is going to be Baal Tosif? It's not Baal Tosif. I finished the mitzvah. Now listen to the answer. Shani hacha, it says the Gemara, Kevan the ilu mitrami leit sibura achrina hadem avarech. Since if this Kohen is walking down the street after shul and they call him in, come. Are you a Kohen? Yeah, come. We need to hear the bracha. And he would be able to give him the bracha. Therefore, kula yoma zimnehu. Right? Now, the whole day became a period of the mitzvah because you could do the mitzvah again. Therefore, adding to it needlessly would be a problem. It was this sentence, these few words, that was quoted by Tosfot in Rosh Hashanah 16b, where the answer was no. So the redoing of the same mitzvah again and again and again, not adding to it, but performing it and then performing the same thing on repeat, that's not Baal Tosif. It's only if you add to it, here in the case of a person who wants to add a pasuk to the brachas, that would be a problem because the entire day is considered the time of the mitzvah. Okay, before I go to the next step, Larry, please go ahead.
I don't understand the concept of Eino Over Ella Bismano.
Okay.
To me, it would mean that in terms of something that has a fixed time, you could never be over with Baal Tosif. Because once the time has passed, you're done.
Right.
But you could.
Sounds like it.
if I understood you correctly, you said someone decides they're going to celebrate Sukkot or Pesach in Kislev. Is that Baal Tosif?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. If you come in Kislev and you say, you see these 5 species, this is the mitzvah of lulav, and I will perform it now, that would be a problem. Because now the 5 species, you've elevated to level mitzvah. But let's say Sukkot ended, and the day after Sukkot, you pick up the 4 species. Not doing anything. You want to be in your sukkah on the 8th day? Rava says, you're not doing anything. The mitzvah's time ended. That's not Baal Tosif.
So someone takes a kosher lulav, takes a kosher arba minim in Kislev, and takes them and says, I'm now going to be Mekayim the mitzvah of arba minim.
Yeah. That would be a big problem.
But are they over of Baal Tosif, or are they over of something else?
Shelo bizmana.
It's shelo bizmana, except the problem is now you change the mitzvah object and you're actively declaring that you're doing the mitzvah in this way. That's where it becomes a problem.
But that's what I'm asking. As Yudah said, it's shelo bizmana, but it's not. I think I'm asking, is there a difference between shelo bizmana and Baal Tosif? They sound like they're 2 different concepts.
Well, that's what the Gemara is trying to figure out is it true that Baal Tosif is any time that you do something that has already been done before and you're sort of doing it on repeat, that you violated this mitzvah? Is it just changing objects? Or
no. But the Gemara said, I'm just focusing on that one line, and I could be, the focus could be way too narrow.
Yeah.
It said, Eino over elo bizmano.
Right. Here.
So
Rava says, right, you can only be over, Shani Omer, mitzvot eino over alein ela bizmanan, only in their time. Rashi here says, mitzvot eino over alein bebal tosif ela bizmanan. It's
exactly, and that's what I'm trying to distinguish, is between whether the guy doesn't get a yasher koach, but right. I'm just trying to figure out what is the over. It's not Baal Tosif.
You're saying later on, like in Kislev.
If a guy takes a kosher arba minim in Kislev and says, hey, I'm going to get a head start on things, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have matzah and lulav and who knows what else.
Whatever else, yeah.
That's not a mitzvah. I'm going to do all those things today and I'll get done with it. That's not, it doesn't sound.
Okay, so let me revise what I said. I don't know that Rashi would say that would be Baal Tosif, correct?
Okay, that's what I was reacting.
Yeah, I don't think Rashi would consider that to be Baal Tosif, because look what Rashi says, right? Zooming in, okay? That Baal Tosif is only during its time. The Chameshir Aminim Belulav means it's during Sukkot. The Heitot Afot Betfilin, the time when you're chayav for these things. But what is not Baal Tosif? Adding a day to other days or adding an hour upon an hour. That's not Mosif. Why? Because there's no actual active real mitzvah now that you're repeating. In other words, and from here, this was the point. From here, based on this, the Bali Tosfot said earlier, this idea that, well, you might argue against us. I'm going to do something radical, so I hope I don't make anybody dizzy. But let's go right back to that Gemara up there. Here, this one. Okay, the Bali Tosfot had said here. Now we'll go back to this Tosfot. You can see it in a different way, maybe. You might ask, aren't you over in Baal Tosif for blowing so many blasts? And if you will say to me, since you were already Yotzei, it's already Shelo Bizmano, right? Delo Avar.
No, but the Gemara said it's Yom Kula.
That's the end. That's where we go. Exactly. So as we have in the Gemara and Ra'u Beitin, that's the Gemara we just learned a moment ago, right? With regard to Birkat Kohanim, you can't add another bracha of your own because the time has not passed. Since if you're going to, again, have another tzibur in front of you,
right,
you'd have to give Birkat Kohanim again. So here too, ha'chanami, imitrami, like tzibura, haratakalu. If another community comes calling, come blow over us, you're going to blow again. So the mitzvah's not really over. So therefore, all these extra blows really is Baal Tosif because the mitzvah didn't end. Answer the Bali Tosfot. There's no such thing as Baal Tosif when you do one mitzvah several times, such as a Kohen who gives the brachas, then gives the brachas, then goes from minyan to minyan, or takes the lulav, or blows the shofar, blows the shofar. Yeah.
In fact, I think we at Or Torah had this case where one of our Kohanim was I think Shavuos. No, not
hopscotch.
I'm sorry, and they went. There wasn't a Kohen in one of the other minyanim, and they ended up duchening.
Yeah, it's not a chiyuv. It's if the Kohen wants. It's nice. Yeah. It doesn't have to. If the Kohen says, I got to go, they don't have to stay. It's not a chiyuv, but it is a dvar mitzvah if they do it.
Yeah.
Now, it was Shmini Atzeres. I was davening.
Oh, Shmini Atzeres. Happens. Wait, go back to Larry for a minute. Larry, did this clarify it for you?
Yes.
I think let me withdraw what I said about if on Hanukkah you take 5 minim and decide I'm doing the mitzvah, that's Baal Tosif. That's not clear from Rashi and Tosfot.
Well, what I was reacting to is taking 5 minim, that's Baal Tosif if, based on what we learned, you did it during the 7 days of Sukkot. But I'm focusing on is if you took 4 minim, a kosher lulav and etrog, and you said, I'm going to get done with this now. I'm going to be zrizim b'mitzvah.
Right.
And you did it in Kislev.
Not its time.
It's not its time. So you may be over, certainly a bracha levatala, but
from this, it is not clear that it is Baal Tosif. Correct.
Okay, that's what I was reacting to.
Yeah.
Now, the other question is Baal Tosif only with the Doraita or is it also with the Darabanan?
You can't have 9 candles. You can't have 9 candles on Hanukkah.
Right. You can't have 9. You can't have extra candles just like that. But is it actually is there a Baal Tosif Darabanan? The short answer is yes, there is. The short answer is yes, there is. Yes, there is.
So it's possible.
Yes, there is. Actually, that's going to be the Rashba we're coming to right now. So
let's go to the question of mitzvot tzricha kavana, enot tzricha kavana. Pesach night. You're having your seuda.
Yep.
The guy has a hollow leg, and he has 3 glasses of wine with his dinner. He likes wine.
Right.
For small cups.
Yeah.
Low alcohol. He has 6 cups of grape juice with dinner. Okay.
Right.
All right. So he's not under the table.
Right.
That would appear not to be Baal Tosif because it's not being done l'shem mitzvah.
Right.
But doesn't that go to the issue of mitzvah tzricha kavana, enot tzricha kavana?
It's certainly related as well. Also, the context of the meal as opposed to al haseder. That's a very complicated mechanism because for the daled koso to work, there's a shaila of I think the Ran about just drinking 4 cups down, chugging them, and it's not clear that works. It seems to have to be on the al haseder. So if you did it at dinner, it wouldn't necessarily work. But let's say guys started adding cups. There is a shaila about this, by the way. It's the halachic issue of whether you should drink. Are you allowed to drink the 5th cup? There were those who wanted to argue with the arrival of Medinat Yisrael, the advent of Medinat Yisrael, Kamad Medina. It's time to drink the 5th cup. And others are saying, no, that would be premature. Maybe even based on what we're up to.
In that regard, somewhat of a tangent, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh Baruch Rabbi Sachs, Jonathan Sachs, has a wonderful article in his Covenant and Conversation about the 5th cup, the Kos Eliyahu.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, I have to have it in mind. Pesach's coming.
1 second. I have it right.
Yeah, it is very interesting what he says.
Good. Okay, we'll have to get to it. I want to see the Rashba though tonight, so maybe we'll table the issue of the 5th cup. I didn't mean to take us off on a tangent to that.
In Covenant and Conversation in the volume of Shemot, page 43, he has a lovely article explaining Kos Eliyahu. The article is The Cup of Hope. I commend it to you all. It's 3 little pages. Beautiful article.
Beautiful. Thank you. If you want to scan it and put it in an email to me, I'm happy to send it out to everybody. Lovely.
Fully netter, I will.
Okay. So now I want to show you the critique of the Rashba on the Bali Tosfot, on their whole approach. Okay, so Hikshu Tosfot quotes the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah about the blowing of the shofar. Hikshu 100 times, or not 100 times. Seated means before Shemona Esrei, during Shemona Esrei. Hikshu Tosfot Hakaver Mishum Bal Tosif. The Avshal Toretz, the cave of the Tuck of Eriach Shen Yoshvim Yatza V'Charka Chavile Ke Avar Zmane V'Asik Rava Lekan B'Shili Ra'u Beitin the Shalob Izmano LaAvor By Kavana. So Tosfot had asked the question, aren't you over in Bal Tosif? And you can't answer that once you blew the shofar before the Amida, Shen Yoshvim before the Amida, and afterward it's like you finished the mitzvah. We explained why that is, because anytime during the day you could come back to it again. Right? And Rava says further along in Parak Beitin, page 28b, that if it's not at its time, the Shalob Izmano Lavor by Kavana, then you need Kavana to do it. This was what I was alluding to, that we didn't get to in the Gemara there, but that's what Rava goes on to say. If it's Bizmano, if it's at the time of the mitzvah, you don't need Kavana. That it's just going to happen by the by. In the context of the time frame when the mitzvah is supposed to be done, you did the action, you had kavanah to do the action, great, that's the mitzvah. But if it's not at its time, at another time, you need kavanah actually that you want to perform this mitzvah. So in that case, and this was not based on Rashi and Tosfot that we just saw, it was like further down on 28b, where the Gemara goes into this idea that Rava makes a split. If it's the time frame of a mitzvah, the context of the mitzvah, your performance of it does not require the kavana latzeit b'mitzvah, just the kavana to do the action, whatever the action might be. But when it's not the time of the mitzvah, you need actual active kavana. This would be the case of in Kislev, you want to eat matzahs and say, this is my Pesach. That would be the Shalob Izmano, and you have kavana, this is my Pesach, that would be Bal Tosif. The hachanami mitkaven hu l'mitzvah, v'hilkach ika mishum Bal Tosif. V'hein zichronim livracha tirtzu l'shayach Bal Tosif, the Bal Tosfot had concluded, there's no such thing as Bal Tosif when you do a mitzvah 2 times. And with regard to Birkat Kohanim, this is the same thing. With Birkat Kohanim Nami, afilu mevarchin, kama pa'amim biyom, l'tzibur echad, ein ze Bal Tosif. Elin kein, hosif bracha acheret, mishalo, kigon Hashem elokei avotechem, yosef aleichem v'chol yotze b'zeh. The Bal Tosfot said that you cannot be over on Bal Tosif by doing the same mitzvah repeatedly. As long as you don't add to the text of the bracha, that would be fine. If you take the lulav several times, fine. If you ate matzah and then you went and ate more matzah the same day, that's not Bal Tosif. And I gave the example here also. I skipped it for us. It's on the page 28b about the application of blood for various korbanot, whether it goes on one face of the mizbeach or whether it has to go on all 4 faces by touching the blood onto 2 corners. I didn't go into that with you, but even if you did it repeatedly, according to Bal Tosfot, that's not Bal Tosif. And so too, if you blew the shofar and you went back and you blew again, even 100 times in the same day. If you said each time I'm going to be mekavin the mitzvah, Bal Tosif. That's not Bal Tosif. V'heim zal tarchu lahamid shitazu v'lo alta yafe biyadam. But according to the Rashba, they worked very hard to make this shita work. But he says, I don't think it really works. I don't think it's true. He'll explain what he means. This is a more modern printing of the Rashba. It's actually paragraphs, and it's in block letters we can see. It seems logical that this is not challenging. It refers, what is Bal Tosif? Where the Kohen takes initiative to add a line of the bracha. V'inami, and also, Yashin b'shmini b'sukkah b'mit kavin l'mitzvah. A person who goes into the sukkah on the 8th day, goes to sleep there and has in mind, I am being mekayim the mitzvah of Sukkot. Sukkah's ended already, mister. But it's Shmini Atzeret. I want to be in my sukkah in Israel. And I want to have kavanah latzei b'mitzvah. You can't do that. That is Bal Tosif, right? V'inami, b'mashi ira b'mikra shnit arev matan ach matan arba chiyot zebel. Okay, and also the case in the Beit HaMikdash, again, I skipped it. Aval, b'masha amdu chachamim v'tiknu l'tzorech ein kamishum Bal Tosif dekvar amra Torah al pia Torah shoyerucha. This is it. Anytime the chachamim got up and they made a takana for some purpose that you should do a mitzvah X number of times for Y number of days with Z objects, whatever it is, that became part of the mitzvah. because they got the license to make these enactments. That's what it means in the 17th chapter of Sefer Dvarim, Al Pi HaTorah Yorucha, to follow the instruction that they give you. V'teidelecha. Therefore, you should understand. The Hashmini Shel Sukkah B'zman Hazeh Mitzvah Shel Divrayim. Art, contra what we said earlier, in the Rashba's time and place, V'yeshen v'ochbim ba l'mitzvah. We do sit on the 8th day of Sukkot in Chutz La'aretz, which is Shmini Atzer. We sit in the Sukkah. And we know how the calendar works nowadays. It is not a mystery to us. It's true. And we know that Rabbi Yochanan announces in the Gemara Masachet Rosh Hashanah that wherever the emissaries for Nisan could arrive, but they might not be able to get there in time for Tishrei, we'll make 2 days of Yontif. We're worried about, even in Nisan, we'll make 2 days of Pesach for the Seder. 2 Seders, we're worried about what's going to happen in Tishrei. Remember, because Tishrei, the holiday, is not the 15th, but Tishrei is the 1st of the month. So these emissaries, technically, they would get there and say, well, it's already Yontif, you missed it. So we have the Gzera of the 2 days of Yontif for Rosh Hashanah. So even when we have all of that, the point is that's not Baal Tosif. Why isn't that Baal Tosif? Alma, therefore, Kol Litzorach Beitim goes into Masifin Rashut Biyadam. Whatever the sages want to enact, that is their license. It's true also in terms of detraction for the sake of the mitzvah, kigon, such as, top of the next column, Yom Tov shel Rosh Hashanah shechal liot b'Shabbat. Af agav d'amar Torah tik'u, amdu, v'gazru, shelo litkoa, v'chol zeh litzorech. V'hachanami litzorech ra'u litkoa, v'lachzer litkoa. Mitzvah lishmol divrei chachamim lo tasur kain nearly. In other words, this is a question that the Ba'ai Tosfot to figure out some kind of an answer to with regard to how many times you're blowing the shofar. Rabbi Yitzchak asked, why do we blow the shofar before the Shemoneh Esrei? I blow the shofar during the Shemoneh Esrei. The answer is la'arbi v'eda satan. So Tosfot want to know, well, that's Baal Tosif you're adding. The answer, no, you could. Baal Tosif does not mean anything when it comes to repeating the same mitzvah again and again. The Rashba says, yes, it is. You can't just decide, I want to repeat. It's the 8th day of Sukkot in Israel. I want to be in my Sukkah L'Shem mitzvah because I like being in a Sukkah. So I'm going to be here and I'm going to fulfill the mitzvah of Sukkot. It's not Sukkot anymore. That's Baal Tosif, says the Rashba. But he says as follows: why isn't it Baal Tosif to have 100 blasts of the shofar? Why isn't it Baal Tosif on Shmini Atzeret and Chutz La'aretz to sit in the Sukkah, even though we know 100% it's not really a Sveika Diyoma anymore because we know the calendar? Answer: because the Chachamim legislated it as such. And the caveat on the mitzvah of Baal Tosif is that the Chachamim have the koach, have the power to enact various aspects of halacha, which is not Baal Tosif. The Chachamim are adding to the Torah. The Chachamim are putting a geder, a siag, a fence, a something, a guardrail. You can't argue that that is an aspect of adding to or detracting from the Torah. Remember the Rambam's rule about Baal Tosif. Baal Tosif would be claiming that something is derabbanan, is really d'oraita, or vice versa. But that's not what's happening here. Here, the Chachamim made an enactment.
So in that case, if I'm in Eretz Yisrael, okay, let's say I go to Eretz Yisrael for Pesach, and I'm going to a Seder there, and the people, obviously the people in Israel only observe 1 day, one Seder. I could go and I keep the two Sedorim. If they decide they want to observe it, it's Baal Tosif for them.
Yeah, right. That would be a perfect example.
Right.
A perfect example.
Right.
If you're there and you're claiming that it's not Pesach for them. It's not a Sukkah.
No.
Now if they want to sit there and eat matzahs,
it's not Pesach for them. It's just not. They don't keep.
They could eat matzahs.
Right. They can eat matzahs.
No skin off their back to eat the matzahs. But if they're going to say Ashik Shom Salon Zman Al Matzah, no way.
The bracha levatah.
That would be bracha levatah. That would be a problem. Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
It would also be Baal Tosif.
No, that's the point. It would be Baal Tosif. If they said on the second night of Pesach, you're a chutznik, you're an Eretz Yisrael, you're making a second Seder, and they say, we'd like to have a second Seder too. It sounds like a nice idea. So you're not allowed to. You're not a Ben Chutzlatz, you're Ben Eretz Yisrael. So yeah, we're going to make the brachas with you anyway, just to be nice. That's Baal Tosif. They can have bread with you. They can eat the matzah. I mean, they could drink wine, But to have in mind, we're being yotzi the mitzvah? No. What if they had kavanah shelo latzeit? Maybe that would be okay. Maybe. Now, the Pnei Yehoshua came along and engaged this argument between the Rashba and Tosfot. Sorry?
I didn't understand what you just said. They had kavanah to do what?
If the people who are not obligated in the mitzvahs of Leil HaSeder on the second night, meaning Israelis,
Yes.
decide they're going to eat matzah l'shem mitzvah for the sake of being makayim the mitzvah of a chilat matzah on the second night, because you're with them in Israel, or they're with you in Chutz La'aretz, that would be Baal Tosif.
I said you that, but you then said something about Shalol Tzeit. I didn't understand that.
Let's say they sit with you and they say, we don't want you to sit alone at your Seder. Comes time for the motzah, you say, you know what, I'm hungry for dinner too. So you to pick up your matzahs on your Seder plate, and they go to wash, and you go to wash, and then you pick up the matzahs. I should have said it that way. You pick up the matzahs, you say the bracha motzach min haaretz, they say amen. Then you say the bracha asher yishom sal tzvanu ala chilat matzah. They don't want to be rude, but if they say amen to that bracha, they have to have in mind, we're not yotze on this bracha. We have kavanah shelo latzeit when we say amen to the bracha chilat matzah. Because if they have kavanah latzeit, that's Baal Tosif. They can't perform the mitzvah just because they want to.
Okay, now I understand.
And the Rashba's point against the Baalei Tosfot is, it's not about how many times you repeat a mitzvah. It's whether the repetition of said mitzvah was sanctioned by Chachamim. And the answer is, why do we have so many tkiyas that we blow? Because Chachamim said so. Why do we have an extra night of sitting in the Sukka and Chutz La'aretz? Because the Chachamim said so. But if you would take it on yourself to invent something, that's Baal Tosif. Now we'll see the last thing here. 5 minutes left. This is the Pnei Yehoshua. I don't know if we'll get to the whole thing. Let's see how far we get. So the Pnei Yehoshua quotes these ideas. He says, look in Tosfot on this page 16b. We'll look on page 28b and see it more in depth. But once I saw the Rashba address the words of the Baalei Tosfot, he criticized the words of the Baalei Tosfot. Now I want to focus on it a little bit more here, now, in this moment. So he says as follows. Now that I saw the Rashba engage this in another on this page. Lo shayach Baal Tosif el b'misha ba lahosif midat atzmo. Ma she'en came b'ma'aseh tiknu chachamim. Lo shayach Baal Tosif klal. Ayin sham. That's what we just read. The problem of Baal Tosif is when I invented it out of whole cloth. I decided I like it. That's not good enough. But if the Chachamim said it, then that's not Baal Tosif. That's the Rashba's retort to the Baalei Tosfot claiming that it's about repeating mitzvahs is not a problem, really, when you do the action again and again. Uve'emet shediver harashba zal bezeh kirei mutzakim. It's like a very strong mirror. It's meaning it's got strong power to it. You could even ask a question against the Baalei Tosfot. Shelo tirtzu kain. Why didn't the Baalei Tosfot think of this? It seems so obvious that it has to do with whether Chachamim made a takana or not. Omnam, indeed, Lofianu Daiti says the Pnei Yehoshua, Tahach miltut lo shayach Baal Tosif takana Chachamim, hainu davka b'may shetiknu Chachamim mishum geder. When is there no Baal Tosif? There's no Baal Tosif when the Chachamim made a takana for the sake of a geder, literally a fence protecting the Torah. Kigon, dvarim mishtanim lefi hazman, such as where there were things that happened that changed over time, ulefi kilkul hadorot, and based on the, how would you say kilkul hadorot, the undoing that's going on among the generations, i.e., the corruption of the generations. Things are getting lost, or whatever, so they have to do a course correction. That's when, and that's why the Torah gave power over to the Chachamim, V'chihai Gavna, and along those lines, Megillah, here comes Purim, V'Chanukah, Shenishtaneh Davar, that things changed. Shetiknu Machmar Hishtanuta Inyan La'achar Matan Torah. Things changed, meaning there was a new moment in history, right, after Matan Torah, Purim, Hanukkah. To me, the Pnei Yehoshua is making a little bit light of the arduous process. If you look in the Gemara and Masechet Megillah and Daf Zayin, there is a discussion about whether or not to admit Megillat Esther into the canon, whether there should be another Yontif. And then the Gemara asks about Hanukkah. How could you have Hanukkah? You're not allowed to add anything. It's the Gemara. I want to say it's Nadarim Chaf Bet, but I may be getting that wrong. But there's a Gemara that discusses it, that Ayala Shach, the last of all the Nisim, that's coming. That's really Purim. And the Gemara says, what about Hanukkah? Yeah, Hanukkah, there's no Nevi'im, et cetera, but the Pnei Yehoshua is basically saying, look, when did the Chachamim get the power to make enactments? It's when things change in history, i.e. Purim, Hanukkah, or to fix things when things are going off the rails. Ma she'ein kain. Whoops. Ma she'ein kain b'chiyai gavna. That's not the case that the Bai Tosif are dealing with blowing shofar all sorts of times. B'chiyai gavna. The hacha, the masik ri, time k'di la'arba v'satan. The ri here is Rabbi Yitzchak in the Gemara. He says to mix up the satan. Shezai yanei ashach bisman matan Torah. The satan was around in the time of Matan Torah too. It's not shayach only because something changed in history, says the Pnei Yehoshua. The Rabbi Yitzchak was saying we already have this tradition already from Sinai. Before the Shmoneh Esrei, again, you'll ask me, but there was no Shmoneh Esrei at Har Sinai. Yeah, I understand. The point is, it went all the way back. There was already a problem of the prosecutorial forces in Shemayim that we need the shofar to countervail. So to argue that it's the Chachamim have a power and that's not Baal Tosif, there's no need for that here. Shezenia Shab is Maman Torah. Umishum Hachi Ihava Ashkechan Beoraita Shein Likoa Elapam Achat Shapir Havashayel Bu Baal Tosif. If the Torah had actually literally explicitly said you may not blow shofar except for one time or however many times, but it specified the number, so yes, that would be Baal Tosif. You keep going. Adarabba. Shayach be'ela hadvarim she'ena ta rashai l'chades behem davar me'ata mishum hachim etartzim be'inyan acher kach nirali. In other words, let me summarize outside and then I'll let you go. It's already 9 o'clock. The Pnei Yehoshua basically says, I hear what the Rashba is saying. The Rashba argued against Tosfot and claimed that the easier answer to what Baal Tosif is the split between whatever the Chachamim did versus whatever an individual chose to ad-lib on their own. If the Chachamim chose to do it, they have automatic license. Their license is that what they do is not Baal Tosif. They want to add a day of Yontif. They want to tell us we have to blow extra shofar. No problem. That's the Chachamim Zichron Livracha. But if an individual wants to add a line to Birkat Kohanim, no way. You want to sit in the Sukkah after Sukkot ended and say, I'm performing the mitzvah now because I like performing the mitzvah 8 days instead of 7? No way. You cannot, in Eretz Yisrael, you cannot do that. The Pnei Yehoshua said, how come Tosfot didn't think of that? Isn't it so obvious? Answered the Pnei Yehoshua, for the Bali Tosfot, there's a more limited, I would say, constricted view of what the power of the Chachamim might be. The power of the Chachamim is in a situation where they have to do something. It's these two lines. They were able to enact things that was a protection for the system or something that is a result of a historical exigency. That's where they, not you and me, but they, the Chachamim Zichron Livracha of Sanhedrin Gadol, have the power to enact things. But if there are things that go all the way back to Har Sinai, example, the fact that Rabbi Yitzchak explains the plethora of sounds of the shofar as a result of having to be ma'arbev the satan, right? Which again, I could see a perfect Jew sees this literally mystical terms. There's a satan with wings and it's standing in a shamayim somewhere and it's banging a gavel and it's screaming, whatever. I do not see it that way, but the satan referring to the notion of the Yetzer Hara, how easy it is to poo-poo the sound of the shofar and to become inured to it and having to hear it a number of times till it sinks in, if you will. I see it much more along those lines, the satan as the Yetzer Hara, as is described by Reish Lakish, the Gemara and Bava Batra. So here, the Pnei Yehoshua says Tosfot could not reach for the answer of saying, well, the Chachamim did it, so it's okay. Because here, this is not an issue of the Chachamim fixing something that went off the rails later, nor is it because of historical exigency. It was a reality at Matan Torah just the same. Ergo, there is no capacity to divide Baal Tosif as what you made up versus what Chachamim decided to enact, but rather In this case, it's to define Baal Tosif as something which is not including the repeat of the same mitzvah again and again, but rather while the mitzvah is still extant, it's still the time of the mitzvah, you deciding to add things into it, adding a line to Birkat Kohanim or some such thing. The Baalei Tosfot did not treat, and that Tosfot did not treat the question of objects of mitzvah. For that, we'll have to come back next time to see it more in depth. We did not get tonight to another section that I wanted to see. I guess we'll leave it already for next time, which is the Shita of the Shiltei Giborim. But we are out of time, so I don't want to take us too far afield.
May I ask a quick question?
Please.
Is this argument that we dealt with tonight was the resistance or the addition of Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut? We don't have
no. It is not a question of Baal Tosif. No. It's a much more complex shaila that is not related actually to Baal Tosif as far as I could tell. No. Mm-hmm. There is a question about Yom Ha'atzmaut generally, but about the particular question of the recitation of Hallel turns on other factors. But it's beyond the scope of what we have time for tonight. It would take me too long to start explaining it. Yeah.